Across the wide-open plains of Iowa, where the land stretches farther than the eye can see and the sky feels impossibly close. There are towns hidden behind rows of windbreak trees. From a distance, these towns look peaceful. Quiet streets. Empty farmhouses. Trees standing in long, protective lines against the endless prairie wind. But when night falls, the wind changes. It no longer sounds like wind. It whispers. It cries. It carries voices through the trees that were planted to protect the living, but now seem to shelter something else. Doors creak open by themselves. Old porches groan with unseen footsteps. Lights flicker in houses that have not had electricity for decades. Locals say the windbreaks remember everything. Every funeral procession. Every failed harvest. Every family that packed up and left, abandoning their homes to the prairie. Tonight, we travel beyond the highways and farm roads. Into the most haunted prairie windbreak towns in Iowa. Places where the wind never stops talking. And where something listens from the trees. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly grateful you are here with me tonight. I hope you are somewhere warm and safe, because the towns we are about to visit are cold, lonely, and filled with echoes that never fade. Iowa is known for its farmland. Rolling fields. Endless corn. Small towns built on hope, hard work, and community. Many of these towns planted windbreaks. Rows of tall trees meant to shield homes from harsh prairie winds and winter storms. But when the farms failed. When families moved away. When schools closed and stores shut their doors forever. The windbreaks remained. And so did the memories. Visitors speak of hearing conversations carried through the trees. Of seeing figures standing between trunks at dusk. Of feeling watched while walking down empty streets. Some towns were abandoned suddenly. Some faded slowly. But all of them left something behind. Before we step into these forgotten places, let me ask you something. If you were driving through rural Iowa at night and saw a small town hidden behind windbreak trees, with one light glowing in a house that should be empty, would you stop to investigate or keep driving without looking back? Now take a slow breath. Listen to the wind. And let us begin our journey through the haunted prairie windbreak towns of Iowa. In the vast, flat expanse of the prairie, there is a place shielded from the relentless wind by a single, dense line of cottonwood trees. This towering green wall, planted over a century ago, curves protectively around a collection of empty lots and crumbling foundations. This is Hollow Row Town. From a distance, the windbreak suggests a hidden community, a secret oasis. But up close, the truth is plain. The houses are gone. Only concrete steps leading to nowhere, and overgrown cellars filled with rain, remain. By day, the place is silent except for the rustle of the cottonwood leaves and the sigh of the grass. As the sun sets, however, a different atmosphere settles over the hollow. When the prairie wind picks up, passing through that thick stand of trees, it does not simply blow. The voices begin as a low murmur, rising and falling with the gusts. They are not whispers, but clear, conversational tones. You can hear the cadence of neighbors talking, a rise and fall that suggests gossip or shared news. Sometimes, there is the distinct, rhythmic sound of laughter, bright and communal. At other times, the wind carries the sharper tones of argument, fragments of heated discussion that fade before the words become clear. It is the sound of a community going about its nightly life, a phantom social hour conducted by the breeze. No one has lived in Hollow Row for generations. Historical records show it was once a hopeful settlement, established by a tight-knit group of families seeking a new start. The cottonwoods were their first act, a living fence to tame the wind and define their shared space. For a time, it worked. The town, though small, was vibrant. But the prairie is a demanding partner. A series of poor growing seasons, coupled with a failed well project, drained both resources and spirit. The decision to leave was not made in conflict, but in shared, quiet resignation. They left together, a convoy of wagons heading east, leaving their homes to the elements. The phenomenon was first noted by cattle drivers who used the windbreak for shelter. They spoke of hearing parties they could not see. Later, during the Dust Bowl years, transient workers seeking refuge reported the same thing, the unsettling comfort of invisible company. The sounds were attributed to tricks of the wind, a natural auditory illusion. But those who stayed a full night told a consistent story. The voices were too specific, too patterned to be random noise. They spoke of recognizing emotional tones, the warmth of a chuckle, the tension of a dispute. Modern audio analysts have attempted to deconstruct the phenomenon. The specific arrangement of the cottonwoods, their trunk diameters and leaf densities, does indeed act as a colossal natural flute or organ pipe. The wind creates complex harmonic resonances as it is forced through the barrier. However, the analysts concede that while the physics can create tonal variations, the consistent, recognizable patterning of human-like conversation remains statistically anomalous. It is as if the trees learned the sound of the town and now reproduce its social frequency when the wind plays them. Visitors to Hollow Row Town today often come at dusk. They walk among the foundations, feeling the peculiar shelter of the cottonwood line. And then they wait for the wind. When it comes, it brings the echo of a community. It is not a haunting of individuals, but a haunting of a collective. The sound of doors closing, of shared meals, of disagreements and reconciliations, all absorbed by the roots and the bark over decades, now breathed back out by the leaves. It is a sound that evokes profound loneliness, yet also a strange sense of belonging. The town is empty, but its conversations continue. The arguments have no resolution, the laughter has no source, the gossip has no subject. They are the persistent echo of community itself, a memory so strong it etched itself into the very air. Waiting for the prairie wind to bring it back to life for a moment, reminding the silent land that once, people lived here, talked here, and tried to build a life together behind a wall of trees. On the vast, arid plains, where the sky dominates the land, there sits the town of Dustfield Crossing. It is not a ghost town in the traditional sense, for no great disaster struck it. It was simply abandoned, slowly, over the course of a generation, as the droughts grew longer and the promise of a better life lured its residents away. Now, it is a collection of sun-bleached wooden buildings, a church with a leaning steeple, and a single, broad main street of hard-packed earth. And the dust, a fine, pale powder, owns everything. The wind is a permanent resident. It sweeps fresh layers of dust down the empty streets, painting the town in monotonous strokes of beige and gray. This is the predictable cycle. This is the predictable cycle. Residents of nearby farms, or the rare curious traveler who camps in the old stable, report the same phenomenon. They are not animal tracks. They materialize overnight in the otherwise pristine dust of the main street. The path of these footprints is always the same. They begin at the edge of town, where a line of skeletal cottonwood trees, a failed windbreak, stands sentinel against the endless prairie. They proceed down the center of the main street with a steady, purposeful stride. They pass the silent general store, the hollow hotel, the boarded-up saloon. They do not waver or pause to look into windows. They maintain a direct and unwavering course. Their destination is the old schoolhouse, a simple, rectangular building at the far end of the street. The footprints climb the 3 worn wooden steps leading to its double doors. They do not turn around. They do not lead away. The last prints face the schoolhouse doors, and then there is nothing. No footprints retreating, no sign of a jump or dispersal. It is as if the walker simply ceased to exist upon reaching their destination. The wind, of course, will eventually erase them by midday, only to have them reappear the next morning, tracing the same silent journey. The history of Dustfield Crossing provides a somber narrative. The town's decline was gradual, but the schoolhouse was the last public building to close. The final teacher, a woman named Cora Vance, reportedly kept it open for years. For just a handful of children, long after their own parents had given up on the town. She was a figure of stubborn dedication, believing education was the one thing the dust could not take from them. Archives show she lived in a small room at the back of the schoolhouse. When the last family finally left, Cora remained for a time, a solitary figure in an emptying town, until she too was forced to depart for a settlement closer to the railroad. The schoolhouse doors were locked, and Dustfield Crossing fell silent. This history fuels the most compelling interpretation of the footprints, and more like a geological record of that routine, etched not in stone, but in transient dust. The daily life of Cora Vance was a ritual of walking from the edge of town, where she would sometimes gaze at the horizon for signs of rain or returning families, to the schoolhouse, the heart of her purpose. But the mystery of the termination point is haunting. The footsteps do not go inside. They stop at the threshold. This suggests the memory is not of entering, but of arriving. It is the moment of hopeful approach, the daily reaffirmation of purpose. Frozen forever at the point of expectation. The walker is perpetually about to begin the Daya-S work. Perpetually on the verge of opening the door to a room full of students who will never come. To witness the Dustfield Crossing footprints at dawn is to observe a profound and gentle haunting. There is no fear, only a deep, resonant melancholy. The wind scours the land clean, yet this one path persists. It speaks to the power of routine, of a path walked so often with such focused intent that the land itself remembers the weight of those steps. The story is a quiet testament to dedication in the face of abandonment. The footprints are not a demand for remembrance. They are simply a fact, as regular as the wind. They tell us that some journeys do not end just because the traveler is gone. They continue in the fragile medium of dust, a daily pilgrimage from the edge of hope to the door of a future that never arrived. A path walked forever by the memory of the last person who believed the town was worth walking through. Nestled within the low, misty hills of the Brun Valley, the willow trees do not simply grow. They arch and bow, their long, trailing branches forming a living canopy over every path and dwelling. The air is perpetually dim, filtered through a curtain of slender leaves, and carries the rich scent of damp earth and old bark. For the few who call this place home, life follows a simple, unspoken rule. Be indoors by sunset. The settlement's quiet rhythm is set by this single, non-negotiable principle. As the golden light of day begins to fade, doors are closed, lamps are lit behind thick curtains, and the world outside is willingly surrendered. Visitors are rare, but not unheard of. They marvel at the serene beauty, the play of light through the leaves. But they are always gently, yet firmly, encouraged to conclude their business and depart before evening. No explanation is given, only a polite insistence that the roads become difficult to navigate after dark. The phenomenon begins subtly. In the long, horizontal light of the setting sun, the willow groves transform. The spaces between the thick, gnarled trunks, previously empty, seem to gather shadows. These shadows do not lie flat upon the ground. They coalesce, rising vertically into distinct, humanoid forms. From a distance, they appear as still, silent figures standing sentinel among the trees. They possess no detail, no faces or clothing, only the rough silhouette of a person caught in the final amber rays. A young botanist named Leo was the first outsider in decades to witness it. He had come to study a unique lichen growing on the ancient willow bark, and had persuaded the elderly caretaker of a guest cottage to let him stay for a week. He was skeptical of the settlement's eccentric curfew, attributing it to simple superstition. On his first evening, working late at his microscope, he happened to glance out the small window. He saw a figure standing motionless between two willows at the edge of the clearing. Assuming it was a local resident, perhaps the caretaker checking on him, Leo raised a hand in greeting. The figure did not move. Curiosity overriding caution, Leo stepped outside. The air was cool and still, the only sound the soft rustle of a million leaves. Leo called out a hello. The figure remained impassive. He took several steps forward, and as he did, he noticed a second figure deeper in the grove, and then a third. All were perfectly still, all facing vaguely toward the heart of the settlement. He took another cautious step closer to the nearest figure. At that moment, the last sliver of sun dipped below the hills. The change was immediate and profound. The silhouettes seemed to lose their solidity. As Leo watched, his breath caught in his throat, the nearest figure began to descend. It did not collapse or fall. It simply sank, smoothly and silently, straight down into the earth as if it were a mere projection on the surface of water. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving no mark on the ground. One by one, across the darkening grove, each shadowy form performed the same quiet vanishing act, melting back into the ground from which they seemed to have risen. Leo stood frozen in the deepening twilight. The grove was now just a grove again, empty of any obvious presence. But the feeling of being watched was immense and heavy. He retreated quickly to the cottage, locking the door behind him. That night, he understood. The figures were not intruders. They were the guard. Over his remaining days, through careful, respectful conversation with the oldest residents, a story emerged. The settlement was not built among the willows by accident. It was placed here, generations ago, under their protection. The trees and the land itself, steeped in some quiet, ancient memory, manifest these sentinels at the day's end. They are a perimeter, a warning, and a ward. They stand watch as the veil between light and dark grows thin. To approach them is to test that boundary. The sinking is not a retreat, but a resetting of the watch. The land absorbs them, only to potentially reform elsewhere, closer. The unspoken fear is that if one were to reach out and touch a figure before it sank, the consequence would be to join that silent, sinking vigil forever. Leo left the settlement with new respect. He published his botanical findings. But the diary entry detailing that sunset remains private. Sometimes, in certain lights, he fancies he sees a familiar stillness in the trees outside his own city window. He now appreciates the profound truth held by those in the Brun Valley. Some places possess their own guardians, not of flesh and blood, but of shadow and root. And the wisest response is not to challenge their watch, but to quietly step inside, and let the willows keep their vigil. In the flat, open farmlands of the northern plains, there stands a sentinel of failure. It is known locally as the Red Barn Windbreak, though the name is now a quiet irony. The barn itself, once a vivid crimson, has faded to the color of dried blood and rust. Its roof has surrendered to decades of snow, caving in upon itself. The walls lean precariously, held up more by memory than by timber. What makes this ruin distinct is its placement. Directly between the crumbling structure and the nearest access road stand 5 neat, towering rows of spruce trees. These trees were planted long ago, a living wall to shield the barn and its animals from the relentless prairie winds. They have thrived, growing dense and dark, a perfect screen. From the road, you see only this impenetrable evergreen wall. You must walk around its edge to witness the collapse it hides. By day, the sight is simply sad. The silence is profound, broken only by the sigh of wind through the spruce needles. The air smells of damp wood, old hay, and pine. Sunlight struggles to reach the barn floor, casting the wreckage in deep, tangled shadows. It feels forgotten, a chapter long since closed. But night on the plains brings a transformation. As the last light fades and the stars emerge in the vast, cold sky, the sounds begin. They do not come from within the collapsed structure itself, but seem to hang in the air around it, mingling with the wind. First, you might hear the soft, shuffling thud of a hoof on packed earth. Not a single hoof, but several, moving restlessly. Then, the heavy, warm sound of animal breathing, the rhythmic exhale of large creatures standing close in the dark. This is followed by the low, distressed cry of a cow, a mournful sound that speaks of confusion and fear. Sometimes, there is the frantic skitter of smaller hooves, perhaps sheep or goats, and the nervous rustle of straw. The sounds are unmistakably those of a barn full of anxious livestock. They are trapped, they are frightened, and they are waiting. Yet, the barn itself is empty. The history, gleaned from old county records and fragmented memories, tells a straightforward tale. One fierce winter, a predicted blizzard turned into a historic catastrophe. The winds reached speeds that tore shingles from roofs and peeled paint from siding. Arlen, trying to secure his animals in the relative safety of the sturdy red barn, was caught outside. He survived the night in a toolshed, but when the dawn came and the wind died, he found the barn roof had collapsed under the weight of snow and the ferocity of the gale. Every animal inside was lost. Heartbroken, Arlen did not rebuild. He planted the rows of spruce trees, some say as a memorial, others say to physically block the view of his failure. He left the land not long after. The farm was abandoned, and nature began its reclamation. Yet, the night tells a different story. It replays not the moment of collapse, but the tense, fearful hours that preceded it. The sounds are not of structural failure, but of trapped anticipation. The animals are not reacting to a falling roof. They are reacting to the rising storm, to the howl of the wind that their living windbreak now muffles. It is an echo of the final hours before the disaster. A loop of profound anxiety forever imprinted on the land. Paranormal investigators have captured these sounds on sensitive microphones. Their recordings, stripped of the wind noise, reveal clear, isolated barnyard sounds with no visible source. Thermal cameras show nothing but the cold night air. The phenomenon is purely auditory, a haunting not of sight, but of sound and feeling. To stand within the windbreak on a moonlit night is to be immersed in a paradox. You are surrounded by a barricade of trees meant to provide safety, listening to the sounds of creatures who were not safe at all. The windbreak did its job too well. It protected the barn from the wind, but it could not protect its inhabitants from the crushing snow. And now, it protects this memory, sealing it within a ring of whispering trees. The Red Barn Windbreak is not a story of ghosts, but of a moment suspended in fear. Speaks to the profound bond between a farmer and his animals, and the helpless terror of being unable to shield them from fate. The animals are not here. They are long gone. But their fear remains, a psychic fossil preserved in the dark prairie air, playing out each night behind a wall of trees that now guards nothing but a memory, and the soft, sad sounds of a storm that never ends. On the vast, flat horizon of the agricultural heartland, the silhouette of Still-Grain Town rises like a cathedral to a forgotten faith. Its skyline is not defined by steeples, but by a cluster of colossal grain silos. These concrete monoliths, streaked with rust and faded company logos, stand in silent rows. The town around them is quiet, a grid of streets where businesses have closed and houses sit with drawn curtains. The life has largely gone, but the silos remain, holding not grain, but a deep and resonant mystery. By day, they are inert, massive structures baking in the sun. The wind whistles around their corrugated rooftops, and the only sound is the creak of a neglected sign. But after midnight, when the world is at its most still, the silos begin to hum. This is a low, vibrational hum, a deep bass note that seems to emanate from the very foundations of the structures. You feel it in your chest before you truly hear it with your ears. The sound is soft, yet pervasive, drifting through the empty streets like a fog. It is constant, rhythmic, and deeply organic. And this is where the description shifts from mere acoustics to sensation. Those who have spent a night in still grain town, the few truckers who park on its outskirts, or the occasional urban explorer, report a unanimous impression. The hum sounds like breathing. A slow, steady, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation, as if the silos themselves are the lungs of some slumbering, earthbound giant. It feels like listening to the deep, slow sleep of the land, channeled through these hollow concrete towers. The town's history is a story of boom and quiet, painful bust. For decades, it was a thriving cooperative hub, where every family's harvest was pooled and stored in these communal silos. The structures were a symbol of shared success and security. The decline was gradual, driven by consolidation, changing crop patterns, and a devastating grain elevator fire that, while not destroying the main silos, shattered the community's economic confidence. One by one, families left. The co-op dissolved. The last of the grain was sold off, leaving the silos empty, their heavy steel doors sealed. The humming began a season or two after the last person moved away. A county surveyor, staying overnight to check land titles, was the first to formally report it. He described a feeling of being watched by the structures, and a sound that was both calming and deeply unsettling. Word spread, and with it came the interpretation. Some of the old-timers, the ones who had moved to nearby cities, said it made sense. They said the silos were never just containers. They held the breath of the community, the collective sigh of relief at a good harvest, the held breath during a drought. They said the structures had absorbed the rhythm of life itself, the comings and goings, the hopes and fears poured into them along with the wheat and corn. Scientific inquiries have been few, but telling. Vibration sensors placed on the silos confirm the phenomenon. The structures oscillate at a very low frequency after nightfall. Engineers initially suspected thermal contraction, as the concrete cooled. But the pattern is too rhythmic, too consistent for mere shrinking metal and stone. Acoustic analysis of the sound waves reveals a structure remarkably similar to a respiratory cycle. A gentle swell and fade that repeats with the regularity of a resting heartbeat. No air flows in or out of the sealed structures, yet the impression of breath is overwhelming. To walk the empty streets of still grain town after midnight is to walk through a sleeping organ. The humming breath surrounds you, a sonic blanket both comforting and alien. You look up at the dark silhouettes against the starry sky, and they are no longer just storage bins. They feel like dormant entities, custodians of a memory too large to fade. They are holding the town's breath, keeping it safe in their hollow spaces, slowly exhaling its essence into the night air. It is not a haunting of panic or sorrow, but one of immense, slow patience. The silos are waiting, breathing in and out with the steady rhythm of seasons. For a life that may never return. They have become the town's lungs and its memory. A monolithic reminder that some places do not die when people leave. They simply fall into a different kind of life. A deep and resonant sleep. Dreaming in low frequencies of fields of gold and the weight of shared harvests long past. There is a forgotten hamlet nestled in a shallow valley where the wind has a peculiar habit. It is not marked on modern maps, accessible only by a single, overgrown lane that descends from the ridge. From a distance, it appears as a cluster of stone farmhouses and barns, quiet and picturesque. But as you draw closer, a subtle wrongness becomes apparent. All the fences lean inward. They are not merely old or poorly maintained. Wooden post and rail fences, stone walls, even the low picket barriers around long-dead gardens, all tilt distinctly toward the center of the hamlet, as if subjected to a gentle, constant pressure. The angle is slight but uniform, creating an unsettling optical effect. A feeling that the landscape itself is subtly funneling you toward the silent heart of the place. Engineers and geologists have found no subsidence, no logical slope to the land that would cause such a consistent lean. It is as if, over decades, an invisible hand has been pulling them in. The hamlet is silent, preserved in a state of arrested decay. The roofs are intact, the windows mostly whole, but no smoke has risen from the chimneys for half a century. The air is still, often holding a faint scent of dry grass and cold stone. This silence makes the next phenomenon all the more jarring. Visitors who linger, especially as afternoon shadows lengthen, report hearing a distinct, clear knocking on farmhouse doors. It is not a random tapping of a loose shutter. It is the purposeful, rhythmic knock of a human hand. It is the purposeful, rhythmic knock of a human hand. 3 firm raps, a pause, then sometimes 2 more. The sound is sharp and present, seeming to come from the nearest empty house. The response is always the same. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and an instinct to answer, the visitor will approach the door. They will lift the iron latch, and push it open. There is never anyone there. No figure retreating around the corner, no animal scurrying away. Only the empty lane, the leaning fences, and the wind. But here lies the peculiar detail. The wind in the hamlet is never strong. It is a soft, sighing breeze. It could not create such a solid, wooden sound. Yet, upon opening the door, that same gentle wind is all that answers, flowing past you into the dark, dusty interior as if it, and only it, had been waiting to come in. The history of Crooked Fence Hamlet is one of quiet exodus. Land records indicate it was a close-knit community of a dozen families, shepherds and small crop farmers, who worked the surrounding hills. By all accounts, it was a prosperous, if isolated, place. Then, in the late 1940s, a change occurred. There was no recorded plague, no fire, no feud. Instead, families began to leave, one by one, over the span of a few years. Letters from the last residents, held in a county archive, speak not of fear, but of a deepening quiet, a sense of being slowly, gently pressed inward. They wrote of a longing for open horizons, for fences that stood straight. Parapsychologists and folklorists propose an intriguing theory. They suggest the hamlet may be experiencing a form of environmental empathy, or place memory. The intense, inward focus of a small, isolated community, its gossip, its shared hardships, its collective gaze turned in on itself, may have somehow manifested in the physical environment. The fences lean inward as a reflection of that social gravity. The knocking is the echo of a lost social ritual, the daily check-ins between neighbors, now playing out to an empty audience. The act of opening the door is seen as a key part of the phenomenon. By answering the knock, the visitor completes the expected social circuit. They fulfill the ritual. And what enters is not a person, but the only permanent resident left. The valley wind, which may have carried the sound in the first place. It is a transaction of loneliness, where the answer to a ghostly social call is nothing but air and silence. To walk the single lane of Crooked Fence Hamlet is to feel a gentle, persistent pull. The leaning fences guide your eye toward the central green, where a dry well stands. The knocking, when it comes, is not frightening, but profoundly lonely. It is the sound of a community's habits outliving its people. A polite, persistent request for connection from a place that has forgotten how to connect, answered only by the whisper of an empty sky. The lesson here is subtle and atmospheric. The hamlet is not haunted by individuals, but by the pattern of their interactions. The doors remember the sound of a friendly hand, and in their quiet, leaning way, they still await a reply that will never truly come, settling for the soft, hollow answer of the wind. On the vast, sun-drenched prairies of the Central Plains, where the sky is an endless dome and the light touches every blade of grass, there exists a singular anomaly. It is known as Prairie Shade Village. From a distance, it appears as a smudge of charcoal on a golden canvas, a persistent patch of twilight in the perpetual noon. The village exists in a perpetual state of dimness, as if the sunlight there is thinner, weaker, unable to fully penetrate the air above the rooftops. The contrast is startling. One can stand on the vibrant, sun-bleached prairie road, feel the heat on their skin, and look ahead to where the village begins. There, the light seems to pool and drain away, the colors softening into muted greens and grays. Even at the zenith of a summer day, when shadows are short and sharp everywhere else, Prairie Shade Village rests in a gentle, somber gloom. The residents accept this as a simple fact of their geography, much like a town by a river accepts morning mist. The village is not unwelcoming, but it is quiet. Visitors come for the famous cool climate berries that grow in its shaded gardens, or to escape the oppressive prairie heat for a day. They notice the immediate drop in temperature upon crossing the unmarked boundary. They remark on how the light feels older, softer, like the glow from a dusty lantern. And they are always, without fail, told to stick to the open lanes and avoid lingering beneath the many large, ancient oaks that dot the community. For it is beneath these trees that the second phenomenon occurs. The shadows there are not mere absences of light. They possess a density, a substance that feels observational. At first, a visitor might dismiss it as a trick of the peculiar light, a movement caused by a breeze high in the branches where no breeze seems to stir. But with careful, uneasy observation, the truth reveals itself. The shadows cast by the oak trees move independently of their source. They are not static shapes on the ground. They shift, they pulse gently, and they follow. A cartographer named Ilara experienced this firsthand. She was commissioned to update regional maps and found the persistent shaded area on old surveys to be a frustrating cartographic puzzle. The work was slow, the dim light forcing her to squint at her instruments. Determined to chart its exact boundaries, she set up her tripod and theodolite in the village square at midday. As she took a reading near the base of a great oak, she felt a distinct chill. Glancing down, she saw the broad, dappled shadow of the tree stretching toward her boots. She thought nothing of it until she moved 10 paces to the east for another measurement. She looked back. The deepest core of the shadow, a pool of near blackness at the tree's roots, had slithered sideways. A flush of cold realization washed over her. She deliberately walked a slow, wide arc around the tree, keeping her eyes on the ground. The dark patch detached itself completely from the trunk's shadow and glided silently across the grass. It moved with a smooth, intelligent purpose, not like a casting of light, but like a creature. When she stopped, it stopped. When she quickened her pace, it matched her, without a sound, without a rustle. Ilara packed her equipment with controlled urgency. As she walked back to the main lane, she noticed other shadows beneath other trees. They were not all following her, but many seemed subtly reoriented, their darkest points angled toward her progress, as if observing her departure. The village, she understood then, was not merely in shade. It was inhabited by it. The trees were not casting shadows. They were anchoring them, or perhaps, producing them. She spent that evening speaking with the local innkeeper, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. The explanation was given not as a superstition, but as a matter of practical living. The shades, as they are called, have always been here. They are passive, mostly benign. They do not touch, they do not harm. They simply follow, and watch. The belief is that they are drawn to warmth and light, to the vitality that visitors bring from the sun-drenched world outside. To stand beneath a tree is to invite a closer inspection. And perhaps, to let it learn your shape. Elara finished her map. She marked the boundary of the village with a unique symbol of her own design, a stylized tree with a darkened base. She never published her personal notes on the independent movement she recorded. Some truths are best left as folklore on a map. She now understands why the residents of Prairie Shade Village prefer their open lanes and their softly lit homes. They live in harmony with a unique ecology of light and dark. The moving shadows are their constant, silent neighbors. You may walk through their dim domain, but you must never stand still long enough for the shade beneath the tree to decide it wants a closer look. For while it has never done more than follow, no one wishes to be the first to discover what happens if it finally catches up. The town of Ember Hollow exists in the quiet folds of the countryside, a place where the hills are gentle and the evenings long. Its most notable feature is not a monument or a park, but a simple, unbroken line of porches along its main street. These are not modern electric lights. They are glass and brass, with warm, soot panes, their designs weathered by generations of wind and time. And every evening, as the sun finally dips below the western ridge and dusk begins to bleed into the sky, they light themselves. It is a soft, simultaneous ignition. No hand strikes a match. No switch is flipped. One moment they are cold and dark. And the next a gentle golden glow blossoms within each one. It is a light that seems to breathe. As if in rhythm with the settling world. It paints the wooden porches in long amber shadows. And throws a guiding path of light down the quiet dirt road. For the people of Ember Hollow, this is simply the way of things. The lanterns have always done this. They are a comfort, a clock, a silent sentinel for the night. But there is a second part to the phenomenon, one spoken of in lower tones. The glow fades when anyone gets too close. If a resident steps onto their own porch at dusk, the lantern hanging there will dim, its light retreating to a dull, coal-like ember deep within the glass. The closer one gets, the more the light withdraws. Stand directly beneath it, and it becomes just a dead, cold cage of metal and glass. The same is true for strangers. A traveler walking down the main street at twilight will walk through a tunnel of diminishing light, each lantern cooling as they pass, only to rekindle once they have moved on. It is a quiet form of shyness, the town believes. The light is for the street, for the collective, not for the individual. Most people respect this. They finish their porch sitting before dusk. Or they sit inside and admire the glow from their windows. Over the years, some have tried to test the phenomenon. A curious scientist once brought instruments. But they registered nothing unusual. Just ordinary combustion from an unknown source. A photographer tried to capture the moment of ignition. But her pictures always showed only darkness or a blur of overexposed film. The lanterns, it seems, guard their secret closely. The true nature of the light was perhaps best understood by an elderly woman named Elara, who had lived on the row her entire life. She did not see the light as shy. She saw it as offering a specific kind of solace. One evening, she watched from her window. As a young man, burdened by a grief everyone in town knew about, walked slowly down the street. As he passed, each lantern dimmed, granting him a pocket of personal shadow within the public glow. He was not being rejected. He was being given a veil, a private space for his sorrow within the community's embrace. The light, she realized, was not pushing away. It was making room. It responds not to presence, but to need. For those carrying a weight that requires solitude, it provides a courtesy of darkness. All while maintaining the greater circle of light around them. It is both beacon and shield. Tonight, like every night, the sun finishes its descent. The first star pricks the violet sky. And along the lantern wind row, one by one, then all at once, 100 flames awaken without a sound. Down the street, a door opens. A figure steps out, shoulders slumped. As they walk, the nearest lantern gently dims, then the next, creating a moving bubble of soft shadow around them. The light ahead remains bright, and the light behind steadily rekindles, ensuring the path is never fully lost. The lanterns do not judge the sorrow or the joy that passes beneath them. They only acknowledge it. They make space for it within their watch. They have done so for longer than anyone can remember. And they will likely do so long after the current residents are gone. This is the quiet mystery of Ember Hollow. It is a town that holds its own light, a light that understands the delicate balance between community and individual, between being seen and being allowed to hide. They are keepers of the threshold between day and night, between public and private, a row of silent, compassionate sentinels along a windswept street. In the heart of the farming plains, where the fields stretch to the horizon, there lies a community known as Threshing Night Town. By day, it is a quiet, almost somnolent place. Neat houses line its streets, and the air is filled with the gentle sounds of the present, lawnmowers and passing cars. But as the last light fades and true darkness settles, the auditory landscape of the town undergoes a profound and inexplicable transformation. The modern sounds recede, replaced by the orchestra of another era. A distant rumble, like a thunderstorm gathering beyond the horizon. But this storm does not approach, it simply manifests. Soon, the clear, unmistakable sounds of old farm machinery fill the night air. You can hear the heavy, rhythmic chug of single-cylinder gasoline engines, popping and sputtering without a tune. You can discern the high, metallic whine of spinning pulleys and the distinct, slapping rhythm of leather drive belts traveling over wooden wheels. There is the rasp of a saw blade, the rhythmic thump of a baler, and the continuous, rustling roar of a threshing machine at work. The sounds are not distant. They feel immediate, as if the machinery is operating just on the other side of a hedge, or in the empty lot next door. They move, shifting from one part of town to another, creating the impression of a phantom crew working its way through the darkness. The cacophony rises to a fevered pitch, a peak of mechanical activity, then gradually subsides, fading away just before the first hint of dawn touches the sky. And with the coming of light, an inspection reveals nothing. No tracks in the dew-soaked grass, no scent of gasoline or oil, no trace of the industry that so clearly filled the air. Threshing Night Town was, historically, the site of a groundbreaking agricultural experiment. In the early 1900s, it became one of the first communities to wholly embrace mechanized cooperative farming. The townspeople pooled their resources to purchase a revolutionary set of equipment, a shared fleet of tractors, threshers, and balers that would work each family's plot in turn. This machinery liberated them from backbreaking labor and forged an incredibly strong communal bond. Their harvest season became a celebrated, around-the-clock endeavor, with neighbors operating machines under the glare of lantern light to beat the changing weather. The tradition lasted for generations. Until the very technology that united them finally rendered the town obsolete. Larger, corporate farms with even more efficient equipment emerged. The beloved, meticulously maintained machines were eventually sold for scrap, their parts scattered, their engines silent. The town survived, but its central purpose faded into memory. The sounds began years later, not as a ghostly remnant of a single tragedy, but as an echo of a collective ritual. The first reports came from new residents, unaware of the town's history, who called the sheriff about nighttime industrial noise violations. Researchers with sensitive parabolic microphones have captured the audio in stunning detail. The sound profiles match perfectly with museum recordings of exact models of tractors and threshers known to have been used here. The audio has a spatial, moving quality that speakers cannot replicate, suggesting the sounds are not emanating from a single point, but are projected into the very air of the streets and yards. To experience a night in threshing night town is to be immersed in a paradox. You stand on a perfectly quiet, modern sidewalk, under a street lamp, and listen as a phantom tractor engine starts up with a cough and a roar in the vacant field beside you. You hear the creak of a wooden wagon, the shout of a man that is not quite a word, but the tone of instruction. It is not a frightening sound, but one of immense industry and purpose. It feels like listening to the town's heartbeat, a rhythmic, mechanical. The phenomenon suggests that some routines are etched so deeply into the life of a place that they transcend the physical. The collective memory of hard, shared work, of engines warming in the cool night air, of the drive to bring in the harvest, persists. It is an acoustic haunt, a replay of prosperity and unity, performed on the stage of the present by invisible players. The machines are gone, but the sound of their labor, the signature of that forgotten cooperation, still thrums through the darkness, a testament to the time when the town's soul was not measured in silence, but in the mighty chug and whirl of engines working together under a canopy of stars. There is a place on the high prairie where the wind does not just blow, it listens. It is known as the Whisper Fence Community, though no community remains. All that stands is a long, ragged line of ancient cedar trees, planted a century ago as a windbreak for a now vanished homestead. The house and barns are gone, returned to the earth, leaving only these tall, sighing sentinels. And within their sound, a peculiar and personal phenomenon occurs. The wind here is constant, a steady stream moving through the narrow, needled branches of the cedars. But if you stand close to the tree line, particularly at dawn or dusk when the light is low, you begin to hear more than just rustling. Within the white noise of the wind, whispers take shape. They are not clear sentences, but fragments. Syllables that almost form words. Most visitors report hearing what seem to be names. Old-fashioned names, like Eleanor, or Thomas, or Walter, spoken softly and clearly, as if carried from a great distance on a single, focused breath. The experience is strange, but it is the second stage that turns curiosity into a deeply personal encounter. After a few minutes of listening to these faint, anonymous whispers, a new sound emerges. A visitor will hear, with startling clarity, their own first name. It is not shouted or hissed. It is spoken in a soft, neutral tone, a gentle call that seems to come from no particular point along the fence line, but from the air itself. The voice is genderless, ageless, and carries a tone of simple acknowledgement, as if greeting an expected guest. This is where the phenomenon reveals its rules. The natural human impulse, upon hearing one's name, is to respond. To say hello, or to ask who is there. In the Whisper Fence community, this is a pivotal mistake. Those who answer back, even in a hushed tone, report an immediate and unsettling change. The wind does not cease. It grows stronger. The rustling of the branches becomes more urgent. And the whispers return, this time louder and more numerous. They are no longer just fragments of old names. They are layered, overlapping, a chorus of soft voices. And within them, the visitor's own name is repeated, again and again, by multiple whispering tones, sometimes questioning, sometimes simply stating it as a fact. The history of this homestead is one of quiet tragedy. Land records show it was owned by a family named Voss, who operated a small, struggling sheep farm. Census data reveals a large family, 7 children in total. The isolation was profound. In the winter of 1931, a severe influenza outbreak swept through the remote farmstead. With roads blocked by snow and the nearest doctor days away, The family was forced to nurse each other. It is believed that in their fevered states, in the long, fearful nights, they would call out to one another, whispering names across darkened rooms to check if siblings or parents were still awake, still breathing. The parents, Anna and Henry, likely spent those desperate days moving from bed to bed, speaking their children's names in hushed, comforting tones. The entire family survived, but the experience marked them. They sold the land and moved to town the following spring, leaving the windbreak as the only testament to their ordeal. This history provides a framework for understanding. The act of repeatedly, softly speaking Nemesa those prayers of connection in the face of Ilnessa imbued the location with a specific sonic imprint. The wind through the precise arrangement of the cedar needles acts as a natural resonator, playing back that imprint. The phenomenon is interactive because it was born of interaction. It listens for a name, because its purpose was once to call for one. When a visitor hears their own name, it may be a form of empathetic mimicry, the place using the sonic template it holds to engage with a new presence. Answering back completes a circuit, activating the memory of that desperate, interconnected vigilance, amplifying it into a chorus. To stand before the whisper fence is to stand at the edge of a family's intimate fear. The cedars do not remember shapes or faces, only sounds. The most important sounds were names. The lesson here is about the power of voice in the darkest hours. The windbreak became a living recording of a family trying to hold on to each other with words alone. The phenomenon advises quiet reverence. It is a place to listen, not to speak. To hear the echoes of a past struggle for connection. And to understand that some calls are not meant to be answered. They are simply memories, carried on a perpetual wind. Softly testing the silence to see if anyone at all, is still there to hear them. On the wide, flat expanse of the grain belt, where fields stretch to meet the horizon in straight, orderly rows. The land surrounding the bent corn settlement tells a different story. Here, the corn does not grow tall and straight. From the moment the green shoots break the dark soil, they exhibit a subtle, persistent lean. As the stalks mature, the twist becomes more pronounced, each plant forming a gentle, consistent spiral. As if shaped by a wind that never ceases, though the air is often still. The result is a vast, whispering sea of green corkscrews, a landscape that seems perpetually braced against an unseen pressure. The settlement itself is a small, quiet cluster of homes and silos built on a low rise, an island looking out over the peculiar fields. The residents are farmers, but of a specific and cautious kind. They harvest the twisted corn, which yields a fine, sweet grain. And they have a single, unwavering rule. Once the sun dips below the horizon, the fields belong to the night. No one enters, for any reason. Newcomers and seasonal workers are told this with a firmness that brooks no argument. They attribute the rustling that begins at dusk to groundhogs, or to the settling of the twisted stalks. But those who live here year-round know better. They know the rustling has a rhythm, a cadence that does not match the wind, because often, there is no wind at all. An agronomist named Ben was sent to study the bent corn phenomenon. His focus was on soil composition and potential genetic quirks. He was a pragmatic man, interested in data, not local legends. He rented a room from an older farming couple who repeated the warning about the fields after dark. Ben thanked them politely and set up his equipment. His first few days were spent in daylight, taking samples, measuring the precise angles of the spiraling stalks. The silence of the place was notable, broken only by the calls of distant crows. But as the sun began to set on the third day, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, Ben was still calibrating a sensor at the edge of a field. That is when the rustling started. It began not as a collective sound, but as a single, distinct whisper from deep within the rows, perhaps 50 yards away. Then another answered from a different direction. Soon, the entire field was alive with a soft, friction-filled chorus, the sound of dry leaves rubbing against stiff fabric, though the corn was green and the air was perfectly calm. Ben shone his flashlight into the wall of green. The beam caught nothing but the spiraling stalks. But then he saw movement. Not of the plants, but between them. A tall, narrow gap of deeper darkness shifted against the orderly rows. It was the silhouette of a space where something was standing, blocking the faint twilight from the other side. Ben moved his flashlight beam a few feet to the left. Another gap had appeared, this one closer. As he watched, frozen, the first dark gap slid silently sideways, disappearing behind a thick cluster of stalks. Only to reappear moments later, several rows nearer to the field's edge. They were not shapes themselves, but the absence of shape, tall and thin, moving with a slow, deliberate patience through the labyrinth of twisted corn. And they were converging on his position. A primal fear, cold and sharp, cut through Ben's scientific curiosity. He stumbled back from the field edge, his flashlight beam swinging wildly. In its arc, he caught glimpses of perhaps 5 or 6 of the dark gaps, all now standing at the very border where the field met the path, motionless, watching. The rustling ceased abruptly, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. Ben did not run. He walked backwards, slowly, until the rise of the land hid the field from view. Only then did he turn and make for the warm lights of the farmhouse. He learned the full story over the next few days, not from questions, but from fragments of conversation he was now included in. The bent corn was not a crop failure. It was a reaction. The soil, the settlers say, remembers a different geometry, an older pattern. An older pattern. The twisting of the stalks is a permanent strain, a response to a pressure that is not physical, but persistent. The figures, known as the standers, are part of that memory. They are not hostile, but they are profoundly territorial. They patrol the fields after sunset, silent witnesses to a boundary only they can fully perceive. The rustling is the sound of their passage. To see one is a warning. To see many, converging, is a clear statement. You are an outsider in a space that operates on an older set of rules. Ben completed his report. He cited unusual mineral deposits and a unique microclimate that might cause the helical growth. He said nothing of the rustling without wind, or the tall shadows between the stalks. Some data points are not meant for official documents. He left the settlement with a deep respect for the farmers who live on that rise. They have learned the delicate balance of their home. They tend the twisted corn by day, and they grant the standers their sovereignty by night. They understand that some fields are not just for planting and harvest. Some fields are also for remembering, and for being watched over by presences that prefer their corridors to be left undisturbed in the dark. The sun sets over the fields of Last Harvest Town, casting long shadows from silent tractors. Rows of corn, wheat, and pumpkins stand bent and heavy, a bounty left to decay under the relentless turn of the seasons. This is not a choice born of plenty, but a silence born of absence. The story of this place is not written in the soil, but in the quiet spaces between the midnight wind. For decades, Last Harvest Town was a testament to endurance. A community bound by the rhythm of planting and reaping. Children grew up knowing the weight of a bushel and the smell of rain on dry earth. Main Street thrived with the honest commerce of a farming hub. But the world changes, and economies shift. One by one, the younger generations looked to distant cities, lured by different dreams. The population dwindled, aging like the timber of the old barns. The last full harvest was 3 years ago. A final, concerted effort from those who remained. Since then, the scale of ambition shrank with the number of hands. Fields were left fallow. Machines fell quiet. And then, the stories began. Not told in the daylight, but whispered over evening coffee, or mentioned in a hushed tone after a town meeting. They speak of the calls. Always after midnight, when the dark is absolute. Always after midnight, when the dark is absolute and the wind rustles the dying crops. A voice, faint and strained, carried on the air from the direction of the fields. It is never a shout, but a plea. A simple call for help, devoid of identity. Those who have heard it say it sounds both distant and terribly near, as if the speaker is just beyond the tree-line, or just behind the rusted grain silo. Old man Henderson swore he heard it the night his dog went missing. He described it as a young voice, cracking with fear. He grabbed his flashlight and strode towards the sound. Its urgency pulling him forward. But with every step, the voice seemed to recede, moving deeper into the sea of unharvested wheat. He searched until dawn. Finding only his dog, whining softly by the fence line, unharmed but trembling. The town's sole remaining deputy, Mara Clay, has taken statements. She is a practical woman, grounded in the tangible. Her initial reports cited wildlife, the trickery of the wind, or simple fatigue. But the consistency of the accounts wears at her certainty. She too has driven the perimeter road after midnight, rolling her patrol car to a stop, engine off, listening. She confesses to hearing what might be a voice, or might be the groan of a settling barn, a sound given shape by expectation. The phenomenon follows a pattern. The calls start faint after midnight. They may come singly, or repeat for an hour. Those brave or foolish enough to investigate always describe the same experience. The voice seems to move, weaving through the fields, never revealing its source. As the first hint of gray bleeds into the eastern sky, the calls weaken. They become fragmented, broken, until they are indistinguishable from the morning breeze. By full dawn, the fields are silent once more, holding only the rotting harvest and the questions. There are theories, of course. Some of the older residents speak of a folk tale, a story of a farmhand lost in a storm a century ago. They say he is trying to find his way home, and his time is the night. Others, more pragmatic, suggest it is a collective grief, the town's own sorrow given auditory form. A lament for the lost way of life, for the children who will not return, for the final harvest left to waste. The land itself, they say, is mourning. Deputy Clay now organizes a weekly night watch. A rotation of volunteers who stay in a well-lit trailer at the edge of town, equipped with radios and powerful spotlights. It is less about investigation now, and more about solidarity. A way to say the town is still listening, even if it cannot answer. The calls have not ceased, but the panic has subsided into a solemn, shared vigil. The unfinished harvest still rots in the fields. It is a monument to change, to the inevitable shift of time and people. And the voices still cry out after midnight. They are a mystery woven into the fabric of the town, a part of its new identity. They fade as dawn approaches, but they leave behind a profound resonance, a reminder that some things are not so easily abandoned. Last Harvest Town is more than a place being forgotten. It is a place that remembers, and in the deep of the night, it softly, persistently, calls for witness. On the western fringe of a quiet prairie settlement stands a solitary sentinel, an ancient elm tree known to locals as the prayer elm. It is a magnificent specimen, its trunk thick and gnarled, its branches spreading wide like sheltering arms. It grows at the precise point where the cultivated land meets the raw, untamed wind of the open plains, the last tree in a man-made windbreak. Its location feels intentional, a boundary marker between the domestic and the vast unknown. Visitors to this spot report a phenomenon that is less about sound or sight, and more about an overwhelming internal sensation. As they approach the tree, particularly at dawn or dusk, a profound feeling of reverence descends upon them. This urge is described as gentle yet irresistible, a silent invitation from the tree itself. People from all walks of life, with no particular religious inclination, have found themselves pausing, then slowly sinking to their knees, their hands resting on the rough bark as if seeking a connection to something older than memory. And in that position of humility, they hear the whispers. They are not voices that form words in any known language. But the cadence is unmistakable. It is the rhythm of prayer. A soft, murmured echo that seems to rise from the roots of the elm and filter down through its leaves. The whispers are layered, countless faint voices, overlapping in a continuous, soothing susurrus. They carry the emotional tone of supplication, of gratitude, of quiet desperation, and peaceful acceptance. It is the sound of 1,000 unrecorded conversations with the divine, all held within the tree's vast, wooden memory. The history of the elm is woven into the village's founding. The first settlers, a diverse group fleeing hardship in their homelands, arrived here exhausted and hopeful. They had no common house of worship, only a shared need for solace. They would kneel on the prairie grass and offer prayers in their native tongues, pouring their fears, their hopes, and their thanks into the quiet air around the tree. It was a non-sectarian, communal act of faith. As the village grew and churches were built, for generations, in times of drought, illness, or joy, people would make the solitary walk to the prayer elm. The tree witnessed every whispered plea, every tear of gratitude, every solemn vow. When a blight took most of the other elms in the region decades ago, this one tree remained inexplicably healthy. Its leaves a vibrant green against the brown prairie. It was seen as a sign, and the village protected it fiercely. Modern attempts to understand the phenomenon focus on both the psychological and the physical. The compulsion to kneel is often attributed to the awe-inspiring presence of the ancient tree, a recognized psychological response to sublime natural objects. The whispers, however, are more complex. Audio recordings reveal a constant, low-frequency sound around the tree, a blend of wind filtering through its unique leaf structure, the hum of distant power lines, and the movement of sap. When these sounds are slowed and analyzed, they produce wave patterns that the human brain, especially in a state of focused calm, may interpret as layered speech. Today, the path to the prayer elm is well worn. People still come, not out of obligation, but drawn by an intangible pull. They kneel in the quiet space between its roots, place their palms against its mossy bark, and listen. The tree does not demand prayer, but it seems to remember it, to hold the emotional resonance of every whispered hope ever uttered in its shade. To be there is to feel connected to the long, unbroken chain of human seeking. To a lineage of quiet strength and vulnerability that sought refuge under the same boundless sky. Sheltered by the enduring, listening arms of the prayer elm. In the high desert, where the land cracks under the sun, lies the settlement known as Broken Well Town. It is a scatter of roofless adobe walls and timber skeletons, a place defeated not by conflict, but by thirst. Decades ago, the single reliable aquifer beneath it soured, turning the water brackish and undrinkable. One by one, the families packed their wagons and left, seeking a future elsewhere. They took everything of value, except for one thing they could not move. The town well. It remains in the central plaza, a stone ring built into the hard earth. Its wooden cover was removed long ago, either for salvage or in a final, futile attempt to reach sweeter water. Now it is a dark, open eye staring at the sky. By day, it is simply a deep, dry hole, emitting a faint scent of damp stone and ancient minerals. But as the last heat bleeds from the desert floor and true night falls, the well awakens. The first sign is sound. From the profound blackness below, there comes a distinct, echoing splash. It is not the drip of a single droplet. It is the sound of a substantial volume of water hitting a surface, a hollow, wet report that rises up the stone shaft. It happens once, then again after a pause of several minutes. Sometimes it is a single, definitive splash. Other times it is a rapid succession, like someone bailing water in a frantic, rhythmic hurry. Following the sounds comes the cold. In the desert, nights are cool. But the air that exhales from the well mouth is of a different order. It is a deep, subterranean chill that flows upward in a constant, gentle stream. On a still night, you can see its faint plume in the starlight. To stand at the stone rim is to feel this cold breath rising over your face and hands. A wintry exhalation from the earth that is utterly alien to the surrounding dry warmth. It carries with it the smell of deep, still water and wet granite, a clean, ancient odor that feels out of place in the parched landscape. Historical records of Broken Well Town are sparse, but the local county archive holds a poignant ledger from a general store. The ledger contains notes on the town's fortunes. The well, once the community's proud centerpiece, was noted to have gone bad in the spring of 1948. A later, handwritten addendum by the storekeeper mentions the Miller family. Their youngest daughter, a girl of about 8 named Clara, was tasked with the daily chore of drawing water. The note says that on the day the well turned, she was the first to lower the bucket and taste the new, bitter salt. This human history provides a lens for the phenomenon. Paranormal researchers and geologists sometimes speak of place memory, where traumatic or intensely focused events can leave an imprint on a location. The well was the literal heart of the town, its lifeblood. Its failure was not just an inconvenience, it was a death sentence. The splashing could be a sonic echo of that final, desperate period, when every bucket lowered was a hope dashed, the sound of the community's vital routine persisting after the people are gone. The cold air is simpler, perhaps the true physical breath of the deep aquifer below, now perceived as ghostly because the life it was meant to sustain has vanished. But there is another, more haunting interpretation. The sounds are not of drawing water up, but of something being poured back. Could it be an echo of regret? A perpetual, unseen attempt to return the sweet water to the well. To undo the geological betrayal that doomed the town. The cold air, then, is the sigh of the earth itself. A constant exhalation of the deep cold where that sweet water may still hide. Forever out of reach. To visit Broken Well Town at night is to stand at the source of a community's end. The splashing sounds are lonely, a ritual without participants. The cold breath is a reminder of what lies buried and inaccessible. There is no figure here, no apparition. The haunting is entirely auditory and sensory, a memorial built from sound and temperature. It teaches a stark lesson about foundation. A town can have buildings, and roads, and people. But if its foundation, its literal source of life, turns against it, all that remains is an empty plaza and a deep, sighing hole. The well continues its phantom routine. A heartbeat of splashes in the dark. Breathing out the cold memory of its failure. Waiting for a thirst that will never come again. In the heart of the warm, fertile valleys, where summer lingers long and the air is thick with the scent of clover, lies a settlement that forever feels out of season. It is called Frost Row. The name is not poetic, but descriptive. Even in the peak of August, when the surrounding hills are golden with heat, a walk down its main lane carries a persistent, dry chill. It is not the refreshing cool of shade, but the deeper, more penetrating cold of a cellar, or a stone that has not seen the sun. The houses of Frost Row are well kept and sturdy, yet they all share a singular, peculiar feature. Every night, without fail, their windows frost over from the inside. By morning, each pane is etched with delicate, feathery patterns of ice, obscuring the world outside in a veil of frozen lace. The residents accept this as a simple fact of life. They rise, they light their stoves, and they watch the intricate frost melt into rivulets against the glass as the day, though never truly warm, begins. But there is another rule, understood by all who live here. Certain houses on the row remain empty. They are maintained, their roofs repaired, their gardens tended, but no one lives in them. They are kept ready, yet perpetually vacant. And it is in these empty houses that the second, more private phenomenon occurs. A historian named Clara arrived to study the settlement's unique architecture and its unusually detailed oral records. She was given the use of a small, cozy cottage to stay in, and was politely but firmly instructed to keep her curtains drawn after dark, and to never, under any circumstances, peer into the windows of the unoccupied homes at night. The cold did not bother her, and she found the nightly frosting of her own windows a charming, if baffling, novelty. Her curiosity, however, was academic and relentless. The empty houses, with their perfect preservation, fascinated her. One evening, well after midnight, she found herself unable to sleep. The silence of Frost Row was absolute, a thick blanket over the world. Driven by an impulse she could not name, she wrapped herself in a heavy shawl and stepped out into the lane. The cold was breathtaking, a solid wall of winter in the midst of summer. Every window she passed was an opaque sheet of white frost, glowing faintly in the starlight. The urge to look, to witness the frost patterns in an unused dwelling, was overwhelming. She moved closer to a large front window. The frost here was just as thick. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw something within the ice. There were marks, disruptions in the crystalline patterns. She cupped her hands against the glass, peering intently. Peering intently. They were footprints. Clear, distinct impressions, as if someone had walked barefoot across the frosted inner surface of the pane. They were not random. They formed a path, leading from one side of the window to the other, with a clarity that suggested a slow, deliberate pacing. A different set of prints, smaller perhaps, tracing a quiet, restless circuit on the cold glass. A profound sense of intrusion washed over her. She was not looking at frozen condensation. She was looking at a record, a frozen transcript of movement. That occurred in a locked, empty house. The footprints were on the inside. Clara retreated to her cottage, the image seared into her mind. The next day, she did not speak of her nighttime excursion. Instead, she listened more carefully to the settlers' stories, shared now in fragments over cups of strong tea. They spoke of the original founders, of a community built on mutual care. They spoke of the cold not as an enemy, but as a presence, a permanent resident that arrived with them. The truth, as she pieced it together, was this. The cold of Frost Row is not meteorological. It is residually human. It is the collected chill of all those who have lived and passed on within its bounds, a thermal memory held in the very timber and stone. The nightly frost is its breath, a gentle exhalation against the glass. And the empty houses are not truly empty. They are kept in readiness. When a current resident feels the deep, internal cold growing too strong within them, a sign that their time is nearing its end, they perform a final, private ritual. They leave their home. They walk to one of the empty houses, and they stay. The community understands. They bring meals, they offer company, but they do not question. When the person finally passes, the house is sealed. And from that night forward, the frost on its windows will bear the footprints of its last occupant, pacing quietly behind the glass. A frozen echo of a final, contemplative vigil. They are not ghosts, the settlers say. They are just impressions left in the cold. Like a handprint in fresh snow, preserving a moment of quiet transition. Clara completed her architectural survey. She wrote of innovative insulation techniques and localized microclimates. Her personal journal, however, tells a different story. She now understands why the residents of Frost Row wear their sweaters in July without complaint. They live within a gentle, cold memory. The frost on the windows is a nightly reminder of those who walked the lanes before. And the footprints are not a haunting, but a preservation. A way for the settlement itself to remember every single soul that contributed to its unique, enduring chill, and to keep them walking, in silence and in peace, behind the frozen glass. On the vast, flat expanse of the Great Plains, where the wind has uninterrupted conversation with the grass, sits Belfield Prairie Town. Its streets are a quiet grid, lined with houses that remember laughter and industry. At the town's heart, overlooking a sea of whispering wheat and wildflowers, stands the old limestone church. Its steeple, a defiant finger against the immense sky, holds a silent iron bell. Or rather, it is supposed to be silent. For in Belfield, the most profound sound arrives not from the living, but from the empty tower. Every night, at the precise stroke of 3 in the morning, the bell rings. The sound is not a ghostly whisper. It is a clear, resonant, single toll. A deep bronze note that rolls across the sleeping town, flows over fence lines, and dissipates into the endless fields. The bell rope was removed decades ago, coiled and stored in the church basement when the congregation dwindled. The narrow ladder to the belfry is thick with dust and the undisturbed webs of generations of spiders. The bell itself is a monument to stillness, secured by a rusted iron yoke. The phenomenon began 7 years ago, according to the town's meticulous records kept by librarian Arlo Finch. There was no storm that night, no earthquake, no event to mark the change. She assumed it was a memory, a fragment of a dream from her childhood. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Soon, others awoke to the singular, nocturnal chime. A town meeting was called in the small community hall, a gathering filled with confusion and a low hum of anxiety. The mayor at the time, a man named Higgins, arranged a night watch. From midnight until 4, flashlights in hand, eyes fixed on the dark hole in the ceiling leading to the belfry. The sound vibrated in their chests, tangible and powerful. No movement, no sway, no cause. Scientists from the state university were invited, then intrigued, then baffled. They installed motion sensors, audio monitors, and vibration detectors. They scanned the steeple for thermal anomalies. The data was conclusive and frustrating. The instruments registered the sound wave at exactly 3 a.m. But they detected no preceding vibration in the bell structure, no movement, no force applied. The sound, according to their graphs, simply manifested in the air. It was as if the memory of the bell's ring had grown strong enough to become real. The town has learned to live with its mystery. The 3 a.m. bell is now woven into the fabric of their lives. Children grow up knowing it as a fact of nature, like the sunrise. Others keep a respectful distance from the old church after dark. The consensus, unspoken but deeply felt, is that the bell is not a warning, but a reminder. Librarian Arlo Finch has a theory, born from years of studying the town's diaries and ledgers. Belfield was founded by settlers whose lives were governed by the clock of the land. 3 in the morning was a sacred hour. It was the time when night watchmen would signal all was well, when anxious farmers would rise to check on livestock during a blizzard, when mothers would tend to feverish children. It was the pivot point between the depth of night and the hope of dawn. The bell, he suggests, may have once served that purpose. To ring at 3 was to assert presence. To defy the isolation of the plains, to say we are still here. As the town changed, as people moved away and routines modernized, that specific need faded. But the land, Arlo muses, has a long memory. Perhaps the collective imprint of all those urgent 3 a.m. moments. All that watchful care, somehow remained. The bell now rings for a congregation that is no longer seated in the pews, but whose echoes are held in the very stones and soil. Today, the church is kept clean and locked. No one tries to stop the ringing anymore. It has become the town's identity. Belfield Prairie Town, where the bell rings true. Visitors sometimes come, hoping to witness the anomaly. They are asked to be quiet and respectful. They stand in the grassy square as the hour approaches, feeling the immense quiet of the prairie night. And then it comes. A single, pure, resonant tone from the dark steeple. It carries far across the fields, a sound of both loneliness and profound connection. It speaks of watchfulness, of a community's enduring rhythm, and of mysteries that do not need to be solved to be believed. In that moment, under the canopy of stars, the past is not gone. It is simply waiting for the right hour to make itself heard, a timeless note held in the heart of the silent prairie. On the edge of the Great Plains, where the wind is a constant companion, there is a place known as Split Wind Hamlet. The settlement itself is small, just a handful of homes nestled for protection behind a towering, ancient windbreak of poplar trees. This living wall has guarded the hamlet for generations. But at its northern end, the windbreak does something unusual. It splits, parting around a single, massive boulder to form two distinct, shaded paths that lead into a dense grove of oak trees. Both paths look identical, carpeted in the same soft moss, dappled with the same fractal sunlight. Visitors, however, tell a different story. Those who walk these paths with a companion, choosing to separate and each take a different route, report a consistent and deeply disorienting experience. They agree to meet at a clearing just a few hundred yards ahead, a journey that should take no more than 5 minutes. But when they reunite, their accounts diverge wildly. One person may arrive in what feels like the agreed time, only to find their friend has been waiting for an hour, staring at the trees in confusion. Or both may arrive simultaneously, only to discover their watches and phones indicate that several hours have passed since they parted ways at the split. The most unsettling reports come from those who ventured in alone. They describe a sudden, profound silence descending the moment they lose sight of the fork. The sounds of the hamlet, the ever-present wind, even the birdsong, vanish completely. The light takes on a timeless, amber quality, filtering through the leaves without shifting. They walk, but the path seems to have no end, looping in a way that feels both familiar and alien. Then, without warning, they find themselves stepping out of the trees. Not at the intended clearing, but back at the split. Or sometimes directly into the hamlet's central green. The sun's position has changed dramatically. Hours are missing, and their memory of the intervening time is a perfect, unblemished blank. The history of the hamlet is one of duality. It was founded by two families, the Vances and the Lowells, who arrived together but held different visions for their future. One family sought to expand westward, to push into the unknown. The other believed in fortifying their current holding, in building a deeper, more secure home. This philosophical split, though never violent, permeated the community. Decisions were slow, compromises delicate. The windbreak was their first joint project, a symbol of unity against the elements. Yet, the legend says the split in the path marks the precise spot where the two patriarchs stood, years later, and amicably agreed to let their grown children follow their own divergent futures, one path representing expansion, the other representing rootedness. Modern investigation into the phenomenon is fraught with logistical difficulty. GPS devices fail within the grove, their signals lost. Compasses spin lazily. Attempts to mark the trails with biodegradable tape have found the markers reappearing on different trees, or sometimes braided together on the same trunk. Psychological evaluations of those who have lost time show no signs of neurological disorder, only a uniform gap in episodic memory. The most compelling data comes from paired expeditions with synchronized atomic clocks. The clocks, upon reunion, are always desynchronized, one having ticked away significantly more or less time than the other, as if each path exists within its own subtle temporal stream. To visit Split Wind Hamlet is to stand before a choice that feels heavier than it should. The two paths are inviting, peaceful. But the air at the fork is utterly still, a pocket of calm in the windy world. Those who know the stories feel a weight of decision, as if the choice is not just between two trails, but between two potential versions of time itself. It is not a place of danger, but of profound displacement. The hamlet itself goes about its quiet life, respecting the grove but not fearing it. For them, the split windbreak is a reminder that time is not absolute. And that some divisions, born of choice and history, can create echoes that ripple through the very fabric of a place. The paths do not lead to different locations, but to different durations. And those who walk them alone must be prepared to pay for their choice with a piece of their day, leaving it behind in the silent, amber light of the oaks. A forgotten toll for a journey they cannot remember taking. There is a town on the edge of a vast plain, where the wind has shaped more than just the land. It is called Watching Tree Town, though few people live there now. The town itself is a grid of quiet streets and well-kept, yet seemingly empty, houses. But its true landmark, its defining feature, is the windbreak. 100 towering pine trees, planted 2 generations ago in a perfect line along the western ridge, stand between the town and the endless, scouring winds. From a distance, they are a majestic sight, a dark green wall against the sky. As you draw nearer, however, a subtle wrongness reveals itself. The trees do not grow straight. Each and every one of them leans, not away from the prevailing wind, but curiously, deliberately, toward the town below. The angle is uniform, a gentle but distinct bow, as if the entire grove is peering over the rooftops, studying the quiet lanes and shingled eaves. It is a collective posture, a silent consensus of curiosity that defies botanical logic. Entering the town beneath this angled canopy induces an immediate and profound sensation. The feeling of being watched from above. Not from the windows of the houses, which often appear dark and vacant, but from the high, needled branches of the pines. The gaze is not malicious, but it is intense and pervasive. It is the feeling you might have walking through a silent museum, aware that the portrait's eyes seem to follow your progress. Visitors often find themselves keeping their eyes down, focusing on the cobblestones, only to eventually glance up, compelled to confirm what they already feel. They see only trees, leaning in. The soundscape of the town is defined by this watchful grove. When the wind does come, it is not a roar. It is a chorus of creaks. The sound is unmistakably organic. A slow, wooden complaint. But to the human ear, it carries an eerie familiarity. It does not sound like branches rubbing. It sounds like joints bending. Like the slow, deliberate stretch of something large and wooden, settling into a more focused position. The creaks seem to answer each other, moving in sequence along the line, as if information is being passed from tree to tree. On perfectly still days, a single, isolated creak will sometimes break the silence, adding to the unsettling sense of vigilant, shifting attention. The history of Watching Tree Town is one of deliberate isolation. It was founded by a community that valued privacy and self-reliance above all else. They were successful, prosperous, and profoundly inward-looking. As the 20th century progressed, the younger generations began to leave, seeking connection rather than shelter. The population dwindled to a handful of elderly residents. The town's gaze, once turned firmly inward upon itself, now had fewer and fewer subjects. This exodus may be key to the phenomenon. Psychologists who study environmental perception suggest that the intense, collective focus of the original community, their constant awareness of each other within their sheltered space, may have imprinted upon the location. The trees, planted as protectors and witnesses to every aspect of town life, became the physical anchors for that energy. As the people left, the awareness remained, transferred to the only constant witnesses, the windbreak itself. The trees now perform the act of watching, because for decades, that is what they saw the community do, watch each other. The leaning is perhaps a physical manifestation of that focus, a literal inclination toward the object of their attention. A kind of vegetative arthritis from decades of silent observation. To walk the streets of Watching Tree Town is to become the subject of a vacant scrutiny. You are not an intruder. You are a point of interest for a memory made of sap and wood. The feeling is one of being evaluated by a presence that has forgotten why it is evaluating. There are no ghosts here, only the lingering architecture of community awareness, a sentinel duty performed long after the kingdom it guarded has been abandoned. The lesson is a quiet one about observation and solitude. A town built to be watched over by its own now finds itself watched over by its shelter. The windbreak continues its duty, leaning in to catch every whisper, creaking with the weight of a history it can no longer see. Forever attentive to a performance where the actors have all left the stage, and only the audience, made of ancient, leaning trees, remains. In the quiet, forested hills where towns often fade back into the wilderness, there exists a community that holds a solemn and peculiar tradition. It is known as Empty Table Village. From the outside, it appears unremarkable, a cluster of well-built cabins and cottages along a winding river. But a closer look reveals a pattern. Several of the homes, though perfectly maintained, show no signs of current habitation. Their gardens are neat, their woodpiles are stacked. And through the clean windows, one can see that the dining tables inside are fully, meticulously set. The settings are not for show. They are complete, with porcelain plates, polished cutlery, crystal water glasses, and often a simple centerpiece of wildflowers, regularly replaced. These houses are not abandoned in the usual sense. They are kept in a state of perpetual readiness. The villagers, a quiet and close-knit group, treat these homes with a reverence that outsiders struggle to understand. They care for them as tenderly as they care for their own, with one understood exception. No one enters after sunset. For when night falls in Empty Table Village, the still life behind those windows begins to stir. The still life behind those windows begins to stir. The sound starts softly, often around the time the evening meal would be served in the occupied homes. It begins with the distinct, grating scrape of a wooden chair leg being pulled back from a table. It is not a violent sound, but a slow, deliberate one, heavy with purpose. This is followed, after a moment of silence, by another chair, and then another, until it seems a full gathering is taking their seats. Then comes the delicate rattle of porcelain. Plates shift and chime gently against one another, as if being adjusted by unseen hands. As if being adjusted by unseen hands. Glasses may give a soft, crystalline ring. The ritual lasts for perhaps 20 minutes, and then, as if a silent signal has been given, the chairs scrape forward again, pushed back to the table. A final, profound silence settles over the empty house until dawn. A folklorist named Elena came to document this unique tradition. She was welcomed politely and given a room in the village inn. The residents answered her questions with patient, yet vague, explanations about honoring those who came before. Sensing a deeper story, Elena decided she needed to witness the phenomenon directly. One clear, moonlit night, she positioned herself in the garden of one of the empty homes, her recording equipment in hand, hidden by the shadow of a large oak tree. The first scrape of the chair made her flinch. It was so clear, so tangible, it felt inches away. She watched through the window as the chair at the head of the table slid backwards on the wooden floor, all by itself. Then the chair to its right moved, then the one opposite. Soon, all 6 chairs were occupied by empty space. Then the plates on the table trembled and settled with a faint, ceramic whisper. A water glass wobbled, catching the moonlight. Elena felt no fear, but an overwhelming wave of poignant sadness. This was not a chaotic haunting. It was a routine. The long quiet in the middle was the meal itself. The final scrapes were the rising. It was an echo, trapped in the fabric of the house. The next day, she found the courage to ask the village elder, a woman named Marjorie, for the truth. Marjorie invited her for tea and spoke plainly. Decades ago, the village was struck by a sudden, severe illness. It was not a dramatic tragedy, but a slow, quiet one. Households were quarantined. Meals were eaten in isolation, if they were eaten at all. The heart of the community, the shared dinner table, was shattered. When the illness finally passed, the loss was profound. To honor those who were lost, and to mend the broken ritual, the village devised a simple act of remembrance. When a household was lost entirely, their home would not be sold or inherited. It would be preserved exactly as it was, with the table set for the next meal, forever. It was a promise that no one would eat alone again. The nightly sounds, Marjorie explained, are not considered ghosts. They are considered a memory so strong, so ingrained in the walls and the floorboards and the very chairs, that it repeats. The love of gathering, the habit of communion, it left a groove in the home. The village does not hear ghosts. They hear the echo of a tradition fighting to continue. A relic of warmth in an empty room. Elena left the village with her recordings, but she has never played them publicly. Some echoes are too intimate to broadcast. She now understands the profound peace in the villagers' faces. They live alongside a gentle, persistent memory. They tend the empty houses not out of duty, but out of participation. For every night, when the chairs scrape and the plates rattle, the entire village knows that in every home, occupied or not, the family is finally sitting down to dinner together. And no one, in Empty Table Village, ever dines alone. Tucked within a deep, forgotten valley lies a settlement known unofficially as the Town That Breathes. Its proper name has faded from maps and memory, replaced by the phenomenon that defines it. This is not a place of ghostly whispers or phantom figures. It is something more pervasive, more foundational. The final town feels alive. The architecture is a quiet collection of wood and stone. Buildings sagging with a weary grace under the weight of decades. But they are not silent. A low, rhythmic creaking permeates the air. A symphony of settling timber and shifting foundations. The sound is not random. A groan from the old hotel on Main Street is answered by a sigh from the mill house by the creek. The hardware store exhales a sharp crack. And the schoolhouse responds with a long, drawn-out moan. The cadence is steady, a resting pulse measured in minutes, not seconds. Then there is the wind. Or what appears to be wind. It moves through the empty streets with a purpose, rising and falling in a slow, powerful rhythm. It builds to a sustained rush, a deep inhalation that rattles loose windowpanes and sets porch swings swaying in unison. Then, just as steadily, it subsides back into near stillness, a long, quiet exhalation. This cycle repeats ceaselessly, a respiratory rhythm for the town itself. Barometric instruments show no corresponding pressure changes in the wider region. The breathing is local, contained within the valley's bowl. Those who stay too long report feeling the town inhale around them. A surveyor named Elias Crane documented the most detailed account. Hired to assess the old mining roads, he set up camp for a week. His journal entries begin with professional detachment, noting the odd acoustics and peculiar air currents. By the third day, his notes change. He writes of a growing awareness, a sense of being inside a vast, slumbering entity. He felt the inhalation not just as wind, but as a subtle pressure, a drawing in of energy that made the light seem to dim momentarily. The exhalation brought a wave of stillness so profound it felt like a held breath. The most compelling evidence comes from the few permanent residents. An elderly woman named Cora is the town's sole guardian. She tends a small garden and seems undisturbed by the rhythm surrounding her. When asked, she speaks not of hauntings, but of symbiosis. Her grandfather, she explains, was among the last miners here. He spoke of the valley's deep geologic faults, not as dead cracks in the earth, but as passages. The town was built directly over a network of them. The original settlers, she claims, felt a harmony with the place. They timed their work to the slow pulses they felt through the ground. Cora suggests the town did not create the breath. The buildings, constructed from local timber and stone, have across a century simply tuned themselves to the valley's natural frequency. They have become a resonator, amplifying and giving shape to a process that has continued for millennia. The creaking buildings are not signs of decay, but of alignment. The wind is the valley's breath made audible, drawn through the streets like air through a set of lungs. Scientists who have briefly visited propose alternate theories. They speak of rare geothermal activity, of air being heated and cooled in subterranean chambers, creating a convection current that mimics respiration. They point to the specific mineral content in the local rock, which can expand and contract with minute temperature shifts, causing the structures to groan in unison. Yet, even their reports conclude with an acknowledgement of the profound psychological effect. The coincidence of sound, wind, and architecture is so perfect, so rhythmic, that the human mind cannot help but interpret it as life. Visitors now come as pilgrims of a peculiar sort. They are instructed to be silent, to listen, and to feel. They walk the breathing streets, timing their steps to the slow crescendo of the wind. Most leave before dusk, unsettled by the intimacy of the sensation. Those who stay the night often speak of a strange dreamlessness, as if the town's rhythmic breath lulls the mind into a state of deep, quiet synchronization. The town that breathes does not offer terror. It offers a profound and haunting empathy. It stands as a testament to the idea that a place can become more than the sum of its parts. The buildings, the wind, the very geology have intertwined in a slow dance, creating an illusion of life so convincing it transcends illusion. To stand in its quiet center is to feel the pulse of the world beneath your feet, to be momentarily enclosed within the gentle, sleeping breath of the earth itself. It is a reminder that the boundary between the living and the non-living can, in the right place, at the right time, feel beautifully, eerily thin. Thank you, my dear friend, for walking through these haunted Prairie Windbreak towns with me tonight. These places were built with hope, protected by trees, and slowly reclaimed by silence. The windbreaks still stand guard. But now, they protect memories, spirits, and stories that refuse to fade. If you ever find yourself traveling through rural Iowa after dark, and you see a cluster of trees sheltering an empty town, remember these tales. Do not linger too long. Do not answer voices carried by the wind. And never assume an abandoned place is truly empty. The prairie remembers everything. Rest well tonight. Keep the lights close. And until our next journey into the shadows, listen carefully. Because the wind is always talking.